It's time you moved to a home, Mom. My son smiled. I signed the papers he slid across the table, but not the ones he thought. By morning, it wasn't my name off the deed, it was his. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. The dining room was quiet, except for the clinking of cutlery and the low hum of the dishwasher in the next room. Eleanor sat at the end of the table, her posture straight, her plate mostly untouched. The roast chicken smelled good, but her appetite had disappeared hours ago. Michael poured himself another glass of water and cleared his throat. That sound, his nervous habit, always came before bad news. He didn't look at her directly. It's time you moved to a home, Mom. We've been talking about this for a while. Eleanor blinked. She thought she'd misheard him. Her fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. The sound felt too loud in the silence that followed. Sarah didn't wait for Eleanor to respond. It would be easier for all of us, she added, her voice smooth, practiced, like someone who'd rehearsed her lines. Her smile was small and cold, the kind that left no room for discussion. Michael gave a reassuring nod, trying to soften the blow. We'll help you with everything. It's the best decision. There's a really lovely place just outside town. You'd have your own room, people, your age to talk to. His words blurred. Eleanor couldn't focus on them, not past the sudden rush of heat rising to her cheeks, or the tightening in her chest. She pressed her hands together in her lap, forcing them to remain still. I see, she said quietly, the words barely forming in her throat. Of course they'd discussed this. She wasn't naive, but she thought they would have asked her. She thought there would have been a conversation, not an announcement. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Michael chewed, oblivious to the storm brewing behind her, composed expression. Sarah took a sip of wine, then leaned in slightly. You've been alone in that big house since your stroke, and we worry you could fall, and we can't always be there. But I've recovered, Eleanor said, her voice calm. The doctor cleared me weeks ago. We know, Michael replied quickly, but we just think this is what's best. It's not safe for you to be alone anymore. Not safe. The phrase stung more than she expected. She looked down at her plate again. The chicken had gone cold. She cut into it slowly, not because she wanted to eat, but because it gave her something to do. This wasn't about safety. Not entirely. She could read between the lines. They had 2 kids under 5, a mortgage, long commutes. Her presence in the guest room was no longer convenient, and now they were telling her it was time. Eleanor swallowed hard, ignoring the lump forming in her throat. When? She asked simply. Michael brightened, mistaking her composure for agreement. End of the month, if you're ready. The facility has availability. We've already done the paperwork. We just need your signature. Of course they had. Sarah stood up, beginning to clear the dishes. It'll be good for you, Eleanor. Social, safe, peaceful, like she was a burden they were gently escorting out of their lives. Eleanor gave a small nod. All right, she said softly. She didn't argue, she didn't cry. But inside, something shifted, something quietly cracked open. After dinner, Michael patted her shoulder as he passed. Thanks, Mom. You're doing the right thing. Eleanor smiled, or something close to it. Later that night, in the guest room, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase Sarah had placed by the closet. She reached for the small photo frame on the nightstand, a picture of her and Michael when he was 5. He'd been smiling then too, but it had been real. Now his smile had edges. She held the frame close, whispering to herself, is it really the best decision for me? They thought I was too old to have any say, but I wasn't as frail as they thought. The house was quiet again, too quiet. Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair in the living room, the one facing the front window. Outside, the early evening sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the hardwood floor. The same floor Michael used to crawl on. The same room where he'd taken his first steps toward her, arms outstretched. Now he couldn't wait to move her out. She stared at the file folder resting on her lap. Inside were documents. The facility brochure, the intake form, the agreement she had already signed. Her name was printed neatly at the bottom of the page in blue ink. Her own handwriting. She'd given them what they wanted, and yet something inside her felt unfinished. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a photo of her late husband, David. He looked back at her through the glass, forever frozen at 49. It had been 10 years since the heart attack. 10 years since she had become the matriarch, the constant, the last pillar standing. Now even her son was nudging her out. Her phone buzzed on the end table. Ruth. Eleanor hesitated, then picked up. Hi. Ellie. Ruth's voice was warm. Just checking in. How did dinner go? There was a pause. Eleanor's throat tightened. They want me out. They say it's time I move to a home. A long silence. Then, did they ask you or tell you? They told me. Eleanor replied, a bitter smile on her lips. With smiles and paperwork ready. Jesus. Eleanor leaned back, staring at the ceiling. They think I'm too fragile to live alone. Too inconvenient to stay. They're wrong, Ruth said firmly. You're still sharp, still strong. You just had a stroke, not a personality transplant. Eleanor chuckled softly, but it faded quickly. I already signed the forms, she whispered. There was a beat. Then Ruth said, that doesn't mean it's done. You have rights. This is your house, Ellie. Your life. Eleanor's eyes landed again on the folder. I think I just froze. Like if I pushed back, I'd prove them right. You've spent your whole life choosing them over yourself. Maybe it's time to choose you. That line sat heavy in Eleanor's chest. She'd never put herself first. Not when David died. Not when Michael got married. Not when the grandkids came. She'd always made room. Always adjusted. Always stayed quiet when things hurt. Now they were packaging her up like an old keepsake they didn't know what to do with. She ended the call with Ruth, and walked slowly through the house, her house. She ran her fingers along the kitchen counter, sat for a moment in the breakfast nook, peeked into the old nursery that became Michael's childhood room, then her sewing space. Each room held years. She returned to the living room, picked up the file and opened it again. One page caught her eye, the line item about releasing liability for property. She squinted. Was that clause standard? She picked up her reading glasses and leaned closer. Her heart skipped. Transfer of property rights, she whispered aloud. No, she hadn't agreed to that. Had she? The door opened. Sarah stepped in, holding a small box. Hi, Eleanor. Just thought I'd grab a few of the kids' toys you borrowed. Hope that's okay. Eleanor watched her. Of course, she said quietly. Sarah lingered for a moment, then said, Michael and I were talking. If you wanted, we could help pack up some things tomorrow. Just a few essentials. Eleanor nodded slowly. That's thoughtful. Sarah offered her a tight smile and left without waiting for more. Eleanor waited until the door clicked shut. Then she stood, walked to her small filing cabinet, and tucked the folder away, not to be forgotten, but to be examined. She sat back down and stared at the photo of David again. What would you do? She whispered. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in gold. And for the first time in weeks, Eleanor's mind didn't feel foggy. It felt clear. Crystal clear. Sarah wasn't subtle when she handed me the paperwork I wasn't supposed to read between the lines. It was a bright Saturday morning when Michael and Sarah arrived, a little too cheerful, arms full of cardboard boxes. Morning, Mom. Michael's voice rang out as he entered, setting the boxes down by the front door. We figured we'd get a head start on packing. Eleanor stood in the hallway, still in her housecoat, holding a lukewarm cup of tea. She hadn't invited them. She hadn't agreed to a date. Sarah followed behind him, holding a clipboard. We've made a list of what you'll need in the new place. Just basics. No pressure, of course. Eleanor said nothing, watching the two of them move through the house like they were appraising furniture for auction. She turned away, retreating to the living room. The sound of drawers opening, boxes shuffling, tape pulling. It all grated against her chest like sandpaper. Michael joined her a few minutes later, brushing dust from his sleeves. We'll keep it light today. Maybe just the kitchen and a few closets. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Without asking what I wanted to keep, Michael sighed. Come on, Mom. It's not like we're tossing anything. You'll have less space. We're just helping. Helping. The word hit like an insult. Sarah entered the room next, holding a thick envelope. This came from the agency. Just some paperwork to finalize the move. Can you take a quick look? She handed it to Eleanor like one might hand a dog a pill, wrapped in polite tone, but meant to go down without chewing. Eleanor took the envelope without a word and opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the pages, familiar language, same address, same transition care facility. Then something new, storage agreement. She looked up. What's this? Sarah barely blinked. Oh, that's just for the items that won't fit in your new room. We figured it was better to put some things in storage than clutter your space. My space, Eleanor repeated. One room, Michael chimed in. It'll be nice, Mom. No upkeep. No lawn to mow, just peace and quiet. Eleanor let out a soft breath, carefully refolding the paper. I'll sign them later. Sarah gave her a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course. No rush. The air between them grew still. Michael shifted in place, then wandered into the hallway again, calling out over his shoulder. Let me know if you need help deciding what to take. Eleanor was left alone with Sarah. You seem unsure, Sarah said, sitting across from her. Eleanor's voice was quiet. I didn't think I'd be treated like a guest in my own home. Sarah straightened slightly, then said, We're just trying to make this as smooth as possible. For who? Eleanor asked. Silence. Sarah stood, smoothing her blouse. We'll be out of your hair soon, just trying to take the stress off your shoulders. Then she walked out, leaving behind her carefully orchestrated politeness and a faint scent of lavender perfume. Eleanor sat still for a long moment. She looked around the room, the fireplace, the photo frames on the mantel, the worn books on the shelf, the chair David used to nap in on Sunday afternoons, the threadbare rug she'd refused to throw out because it still held a wine stain from her 40th birthday. This wasn't just a house. She reached for a nearby box and opened it. Inside were old letters, David's handwriting, faded and frayed, a birthday card from Michael when he was 10, a letter from her sister. All of them addressed to her, to Eleanor. Not Mom, not burden, not room number 204 in a care facility. She took out a folded piece of paper tucked between the cards, a note David had left her once, scribbled in his messy hand. Don't let anyone write your story but you. Eleanor closed the box and stood up, spine straighter than it had felt in years. Outside, she could hear Sarah giving Michael instructions about which boxes to label. Eleanor walked back to the kitchen and poured herself a fresh cup of tea. This wasn't over. Not yet. Eleanor clutches a letter that came with the papers. This isn't the life I planned. The papers weren't what they seemed. There was a secret beneath the surface. Eleanor waited until the house was quiet. Michael and Sarah had finally left after an exhausting day of helpful packing. She sat alone in the living room, a cup of chamomile, cooling in her hands, the envelope Sarah had handed her still resting on the coffee table. She picked it up again, slower this time, and removed the papers. Pages rustled in the silence. Her eyes followed the printed words, but something made her stop. A single line under a subheading, Clause 4, consent to transfer ownership of property upon residence relocation. Her stomach dropped. She read it again. The wording was careful, masked in legalese, but the meaning was unmistakable. By signing the papers, she wasn't just agreeing to move into a senior care facility, she was authorizing the sale of her home. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She set the papers down and leaned back in her chair, stunned. She had lived in this house for over 40 years. It was where she raised Michael, where she nursed David through his final days, where every wall, every floorboard, held stories she had never told. She reached for her phone and dialed Ruth. No answer. Straight to voicemail. Ruth, it's me. Call me when you can. I found something. I don't know what to do. She ended the call and stared at the ceiling. The betrayal crawled under her skin. This wasn't just a matter of what's best for Mom. This was calculated, premeditated. Pack the boxes, smile through it, nudge her into signing the future away, all under the disguise of good intentions. She stood up, suddenly unable to sit still. Her eyes darted across the room, landing on the framed photo of her and Michael when he was just a boy, covered in mud and laughter. She remembered how he clung to her after his first day of school, how he'd begged to sleep in her bed during thunderstorms. When had that child become the man willing to trick her out of her own home? She walked to the dining table and sifted through the other documents, more forms, more signatures, all so tidy, all so final. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Sarah standing there holding another box. "Oh," Sarah said, surprised. "I thought I'd left this here." Eleanor stepped aside wordlessly and let her in. Sarah moved through the hallway like she owned the place. She spotted the scattered papers on the dining table. "Were you reviewing the documents?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She picked up the page with the ownership clause and held it out. Sarah's expression didn't falter. "It's just a formality, Eleanor. Legal language. You're not being forced to sell anything. It's all part of the package the agency recommended." "You mean the package you recommended?" Sarah sighed. "It's easier this way for all of us." Eleanor's voice was calm but firm. "And when exactly were you planning to tell me you were selling the house?" "It's not that simple," Sarah replied quickly, eyes flicking to the papers. "Michael's been overwhelmed. We've been handling your bills, the upkeep, the taxes. We thought—" "No," Eleanor interrupted. "You didn't think, you decided." Sarah straightened. "You agreed to move." "I agreed because I trusted you." Silence stretched between them like a drawbridge slowly raising. "I won't sign this," Eleanor said, placing the paper down gently. "Not until I understand every line." Sarah's polite expression faltered. "You know," Eleanor added, stepping toward the drawer by the kitchen. She opened it and pulled out an envelope, slid the papers inside, and locked it with a small key. Sarah blinked. "What are you doing? Keeping them safe? From who?" Eleanor's lips curled slightly. "From whoever needs to be kept out." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again. "I think you should go now," Eleanor said. Sarah hesitated, then turned and walked to the door without another word. When the door closed behind her, Eleanor stood in the hallway, surrounded by half-filled boxes, sunlight glinting off the glass of old photo frames. Her house, her memories, her choice. She pulled the locked drawer open again and took one last look at the document. A slow, cold fury settled in her chest. Not the kind that screamed, but the kind that waited. Eleanor learns Michael is already preparing to put the house on the market, without her consent. Eleanor locks the papers in her drawer, thinking, "This isn't over. Not yet." If they wanted control, they'd get it, but it wouldn't be the way they thought. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling she'd looked at for 4 decades. Every shadow cast by the moonlight felt familiar, but the feeling in her chest, this cold humming resolve, was something entirely new. She rose before dawn, dressed in her warm cardigan, and made a pot of coffee. The scent filled the kitchen like a protective shield. She sat at the table and opened her old ledger. In neat handwriting, she'd kept track of her expenses, her savings, her small pension, and the modest inheritance from her late sister. She flipped through the pages slowly, her fingers pausing on the last column. A quiet breath left her lips. She had more money than they thought. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to make choices. Enough to fight back. Her hands didn't shake as she reached for the phone. She called Ruth first. "You're up early," Ruth said, yawning. "I didn't sleep. Talk to me. I think I'm going to buy my house." Eleanor said, her voice steady. A pause. "Say that again." "I want to buy it. In my name. No transfer. No tricks." I looked into the title. It's still under my name. I just have to block them from filing anything else. Ruth was quiet, then said, "Good. Good for you. Do you need help?" "I need a lawyer. I know one. She's sharp and doesn't take nonsense from anyone." Eleanor scribbled the contact down, thanked her, and hung up. The next call she made was to the lawyer, a woman named Denise Tran. Her assistant booked Eleanor for a noon appointment. Hours later, Eleanor walked into Denise's office with a folder clutched to her chest. The lawyer, mid-40s, crisp blazer, intelligent eyes, reviewed the documents silently. "You haven't signed over anything binding yet," Denise finally said. "That's good, but your son's been laying groundwork." He's requested pre-approval on a mortgage tied to this property. Eleanor's heart skipped. In his name? Not yet. But he's trying to move fast. Eleanor sat back in the chair, a slow-burning anger crawling into her bones. I want to block anything that lets him claim this property. Denise smiled faintly. We can do that. They spent an hour going over legal language, transfer protections, and ownership reaffirmation. Eleanor nodded through it all, committed. I also want to buy it outright, Eleanor said. I want it on paper, paid in full, just in my name. You understand that you're already the owner? Yes, but I want it in stone, with witnesses. Something they can't erase. Denise nodded. Then let's put it in motion. That evening, Eleanor returned home and poured herself a glass of water. She moved from room to room, taking it all in with new eyes. The living room with the worn-out rug. The kitchen table where Michael once spilled juice and cried. Her garden, now half wild but still holding her husband's rose bushes. She wasn't leaving this place. Not like this. She sat at her desk and began gathering more documents. Proof of income, bank statements, letters of ownership. She wanted everything ready, not to fight, but to win. The next morning, she mailed the purchase confirmation form and met with Denise to finalize the documents. When Eleanor signed the bottom of the contract, she didn't cry. She smiled, a small, steady, fearless smile. Later that night she stared out her bedroom window. The stars blinked softly in the sky, as if nodding in approval. Ruth called. How do you feel? She asked. Free, Eleanor whispered. Stronger than I've felt in years. You're taking your life back. I am. She paused, then added, they wanted control, but they've underestimated me. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then Ruth chuckled. They have no idea what's coming. Neither did Eleanor, but for the first time in a long while that didn't scare her. It thrilled her. Eleanor hands the paperwork over to her lawyer, ready to sign it herself. The ink on these papers wouldn't just change my life, it would change everything. The office was quiet except for the scratching of Eleanor's pen against the heavy contract paper. Denise, her lawyer, sat across from her with calm professionalism. The purchase agreement, technically a formal reaffirmation of her sole ownership, was thick with legal clauses, protective language, and airtight clauses, just how Eleanor wanted it. With the final syndicate was done, Denise slid the papers into a leather folder. Congratulations, Mrs. Bennett. The house is yours entirely, indisputably. Eleanor blinked. It felt surreal. For years the home had always been hers in practice, but today it became hers in power. She smiled, not from relief, but from satisfaction. I'll have the documents filed with the county clerk today, Denise added, and I'll email you copies for your records. Eleanor nodded. Thank you for helping me protect what I've built. Denise softened. You're not the first parent I've helped do this, you know? I believe that, Eleanor said, but it still hurts to be one of them. She left the law office with the folder tucked tightly under her arm and her shoulders square. The sky outside was overcast, but Eleanor felt a strange, peaceful clarity. The world around her didn't know something massive had just shifted, but she did. At home, Ruth was waiting with a bottle of sparkling cider and 2 mismatched glasses. You did it. Ruth grinned, pouring the drinks. Eleanor held up her glass. To being underestimated, and proving them wrong, Ruth replied. They clinked glasses and sat in the sunroom where Eleanor often read her mysteries. The roses in the garden were just starting to bloom. Her late husband would have loved this moment. You're going to tell Michael and Sarah? Ruth asked gently. Eleanor hesitated. I will. But not today. Right now, I just want to enjoy this win. Ruth nodded. Take your time. That afternoon, Eleanor made quiet changes to her home, replacing old locks, updating her emergency contacts, and rearranging the guest room back into a cozy space for herself. She reclaimed her kitchen too, cooking an actual meal for herself for the first time in weeks. Nothing frozen or microwaved. Just roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and roasted carrots. She sat at the table alone, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt deliberate. After dinner she opened the envelope from the county office containing her property document. Her name was printed at the top. No co-signers, no contingency clauses, no hidden language, just Eleanor Marie Bennett, legal owner. She ran her fingers across the words like they were a braille version of her life's pride. Decades of raising a child, losing a husband, battling quiet grief, sacrificing quietly, giving up room after room until now. She filed the papers neatly in her cabinet, labeled them final copy, and locked the drawer. She didn't sleep much that night. Not from worry but from anticipation. She had protected what was hers. She had chosen herself for the first time in years. The next morning, she checked her mailbox. Bills, flyers, and a pale blue envelope with familiar handwriting. Mike, she opened it at the kitchen counter, half bracing herself. Mom, we need to talk about the house. Something doesn't feel right. Sarah's worried. Call me. Michael. Eleanor folded the letter with a deep breath. The conversation was coming, whether she was ready or not, but for the first time, she wasn't dreading it. That evening, she took a long bath, put on her favorite robe and sat in her reading chair with a cup of tea. She didn't text back. Not yet. They would come to her. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. Eleanor receives a letter from Michael. We need to talk about the house. He thought he could guilt me into giving in, but this time I wasn't the one to apologize. Michael arrived without notice. Eleanor was folding linens when she heard the car door slam, followed by the hurried click of dress shoes against the walkway. She didn't flinch. She smoothed the last towel, placed it in the cabinet, and waited in the foyer. The doorbell rang. She opened it slowly. Mom, Michael said breathlessly, eyes flicking behind her as if expecting someone else. We need to talk. Now. She stepped aside. Then come in. He entered like he owned the place. Eleanor noticed he didn't look around. He assumed it all still belonged to him. I got your letter, she said calmly, walking toward the sitting room. Michael followed. I don't understand what you've done. I protected myself, she replied, sitting in her usual chair. And what's mine? Michael remained standing. You bought the house. From yourself? I reaffirmed legal ownership. The deed is in my name now, solely. He looked stunned. You didn't even tell me. No. Eleanor said. I didn't. Michael paced. You're being unfair. We were trying to do what was best for you. No, she said again, firmer. You were trying to do what was easiest for you. He stopped. That's not true. Eleanor tilted her head. Then why did you list the house for sale behind my back? His mouth opened, closed. He looked away. She waited, not with anger, but with certainty. We thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere with structure, he finally said. With other people your age. Eleanor folded her hands. Did you ask what I wanted? Silence. Sarah entered the room without knocking. She must have waited outside. Her expression was polished but tight. We were trying to help Eleanor. No. Eleanor said. You were trying to remove an inconvenience. And I was supposed to smile and say thank you. Sarah's face flushed. Michael shot her a look. Perhaps he hadn't told her everything. Eleanor stood now. You thought I wouldn't notice the clause about the house being sold. Or that you'd already begun the listing process. You thought I'd be too confused to object. Michael tried to interrupt. Mom, you underestimated me, Eleanor said, her voice rising for the first time. And that's your mistake. The room felt small, dense. Michael stepped forward. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought it was time. Eleanor held his gaze. Time for what? For me to disappear so you could cash in on my home. Sarah looked away. You forget, Michael. Eleanor continued, that I raised you here. This house isn't just property. It's my life. Michael's jaw clenched. We just wanted to simplify things. For who? He hesitated. For everyone. No. For you. She snapped. You wanted the house. And you wanted me out of the way. Sarah stepped in. You're making this dramatic. Eleanor turned to her. I'm being honest. Something you both failed to be. Michael's shoulders sat. You can't live here forever, Mom, he said, almost pleading. You'll need more help eventually. And I'll ask for it when I do, she replied. But not from people who try to control me. He flinched. That's not what this is. It is, she said softly. You thought you could guilt me into surrendering my life. But I've made too many sacrifices already. This one won't be added to the list. Michael looked defeated. Sarah remained silent. I'm not giving up my life, Eleanor said, her voice clear and unwavering. Not for your comfort, not for your convenience. She walked to the door and opened it. You should go. Michael stared at her. You'll regret this. Eleanor smiled faintly. No, I don't think I will. Michael's face hardens. He threatens, you'll regret this. If they thought I'd back down, they didn't know me at all. The silence came first. No angry calls. No guilt-laced texts. Just stillness. Eleanor sat in her kitchen the next morning, sipping lukewarm tea. The chair across from her, the one Michael usually occupied during his Sunday visits, remained untouched. She didn't miss his presence, she missed what it used to mean. Now that space was a reminder of what had shifted. Michael and Sarah hadn't spoken to her since the confrontation. Eleanor didn't reach out either. She had said what needed to be said. There were no more apologies to offer. Ruth stopped by mid-morning, clutching a basket of fresh muffins. I heard, she said, placing the basket down. Michael stormed into my salon yesterday, said he was done being disrespected. Eleanor gave a dry chuckle. He doesn't like hearing no. He's not used to it, Ruth replied. You always gave, always compromised. Not anymore, Eleanor said, breaking a muffin in half. I'm not shrinking so others can feel tall. They ate in quiet companionship. Ruth didn't ask how Eleanor was coping. She knew her well enough not to. Later that afternoon, Eleanor received a text. Sarah, I hope you're happy, living alone. Eleanor read it twice. There was no warmth, no concern, just bitterness wrapped in a passive-aggressive bow. She deleted it without replying. By Tuesday, the air had fully cooled. Michael stopped by, not to talk but to collect the last few boxes of items he had stored in the garage. He didn't come inside. He didn't make eye contact. Eleanor watched from the window. His movements were stiff, mechanical, like he wanted her to see he was upset, but not why. She didn't go out to greet him. She let him pack in silence. When he left, he slammed the trunk hard. The echo lingered longer than his footsteps. That evening, Eleanor opened the drawer in her study where the deed now sat. Her name was bold on the title, no shared lines, no signatures but hers. She felt a strange mix of grief and pride. She hadn't lost a son, she had reclaimed herself. The next day a call came from a real estate agent. Eleanor almost didn't answer. Mrs. Whitman, the voice asked cheerfully, I'm following up on an inquiry your son Michael made last month, regarding the property. I understand it may no longer be on the market, but we have a buyer very interested in your home. Eleanor blinked. A buyer? Yes, the agent continued. Young couple, cash offer. They loved the listing photos and location. Is it still available? Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. I'm afraid it's not for sale, she said. And it never was. Thank you. She hung up before the woman could respond. So Michael had not only started the process, he'd continued it, even after their conversation. That night, she walked the perimeter of her home. Her rose bushes, trimmed and blooming. The front steps, still a little uneven from winter's frost. The wind chime Steve had hung near the back door, still catching the light. She sat on the porch swing, remembering birthdays, anniversaries, quiet evenings spent doing crosswords with a cup of cocoa. This wasn't just a house. It was her story, and she had no intention of letting someone else write the ending. The next morning, she mailed a letter to her lawyer requesting additional protections on the deed and her estate. If Michael thought this was over, he was wrong. Ruth called that afternoon. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Eleanor replied, watching the wind stir her garden. More than fine, actually. Good, Ruth said. Because you've earned it. Don't let guilt creep in. I won't, Eleanor said, her voice steady. For the first time in years, I'm not living for someone else. Eleanor receives a phone call from a real estate agent. There's interest in her property. I didn't expect them to come knocking, but now the decision was mine. The next morning, the same real estate agent called again. Miss Bootman, I know you said the house isn't for sale, but the buyers asked me to check once more. They're very eager. They're offering 10% over market cash, no contingencies. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, fingers curled around her mug. Her tea had long gone cold. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but this house is not on the market. Of course, the agent said, clearly disappointed. Should that change, you have my number. Eleanor hung up and set the phone down, her mind spinning. She wasn't angry this time, she was intrigued. 10% over market. She pulled the envelope with the deed from her drawer, laying it flat on the table. Her name was etched across the top. Bold, permanent. She hadn't fought this hard to give it up. But what if there was something else waiting? Later that afternoon, Ruth dropped by as she often did now. There's a strong offer on the house, Eleanor said, sipping fresh tea. Unexpected. Direct to me. Ruth raised a brow. And I don't hate the idea. Eleanor admitted, for the first time I'm wondering what it would be like to start again somewhere new. On my terms. Ruth leaned back. So what's stopping you? Eleanor stared out the window at the hydrangeas blooming by the fence. Memories, maybe. Habit. Fear. You bought this place back to prove you could. And you did, Ruth said gently. But that doesn't mean it has to be your forever. Eleanor nodded, but didn't answer. She spent the evening walking room to room, touching the worn banister, running fingers over picture frames, trailing the hallway where Michael once toddled in footy pajamas. This home had been a cocoon, a grave, a sanctuary. Could she really leave it behind? The next morning, another call came, not from the real estate agent, but from her lawyer. Eleanor, we need to talk, he said. Her heart thudded. What is it? I looked into the documents Michael initiated last month. It appears he tried to pre-authorize sale forms using a power of attorney document that was never filed legally. He might have known the paperwork wasn't valid, but submitted it to a private buyer anyway. Eleanor's breath caught. So he was trying to sell it from under me. Yes, the lawyer confirmed. The buyer backed off once they saw the title wasn't in his name. But you should know, this was no misunderstanding. Eleanor's hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. Michael had never expected her to fight back, and now that she had, he was still trying to win. But the game had changed. That night, she lit a fire in the backyard pit, tossing in the old unsigned care facility documents. She watched the flames curl the edges, watched the smoke drift upward like the last breath of a life. Ruth called later. Have you decided? I'm thinking about it. Eleanor replied, not out of spite, not to run, but maybe for something new. Ruth smiled through the phone. Sometimes we hold on because it's familiar, not because it's right. Eleanor spent the next day reading the buyer's proposal line by line. Clean, respectful, generous, and anonymous. No connections to Michael, no strings. It was tempting. By dusk, she sat with a pen in hand, unsure whether to sign. She'd fought so hard for this home. Not because she couldn't live without it, but because someone tried to take it without asking. Now someone was asking. Maybe the fight had already served its purpose. Eleanor decides it's time to confront Michael one last time. They thought they could take everything from me, but I had one card left to play. Eleanor stood in her doorway, watching Michael step out of his car with tight shoulders and a furrowed brow. Sarah trailed behind him, arms crossed, her eyes avoiding Eleanor's She didn't invite them in. Instead, she waited. You got my letter, Michael said without preamble. I did, Eleanor replied calmly. You said we need to talk about the house. Michael sighed, clearly trying to temper his frustration. Mom, this is ridiculous. Why are you making things so difficult? Eleanor crossed her arms. Because I've spent most of my life making things easy for everyone else. Sarah stepped forward. We just want what's best for you. No, Sarah, Eleanor said, voice steely. You want what's easiest for you. Michael bristled. That's not fair, isn't it? Eleanor opened the folder in her hand and removed a crisp document. This is the signed offer from a buyer. Full asking price. Cash. Clean deal. Michael's eyes widened. You're selling? I'm considering it. Eleanor said, but here's the part you'll like the most. It's my decision. Sarah's jaw clenched. You bought the house back just to sell it. No, Eleanor said. I bought the house back because it was mine, because you tried to take it without asking. Michael's face flushed. You make it sound like we were stealing. You were, she said softly. You didn't consult me. You didn't ask what I wanted. You smiled, handed me papers and expected me to vanish. We just thought, Michael began, but his words drifted into silence. I know what you thought, Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. You thought I was done, that I'd just disappear into a home and become someone else's problem. Michael looked at her for the first time, really looked. You're angry. No, she said. I'm done being small. Sarah glanced at Michael, clearly uncomfortable. You always talk about legacy, Eleanor continued, about what Dad would have wanted. But let me ask you, do you think he'd be proud of how you've treated me? Michael's mouth opened, then closed. I gave up everything when your father died. I helped raise your kids. I paid your debts. And when I needed a moment of care, you handed me an eviction notice wrapped in a smile. I didn't mean for it to feel like that, Michael whispered. But it did, she said. And it still does. He stepped forward, his voice quiet. What now? Eleanor looked at the folder in her hand. Now? I make my own move. Michael's brows knit together. So you're really going to sell? Maybe, she said. Maybe not. But this time it won't be your decision. I've earned the right to choose what happens next. Sarah tried to speak, but Eleanor held up her hand. This conversation is over. Michael's eyes darkened. You'll regret this. Eleanor took a breath and met his gaze with unwavering calm. No, Michael, I regret staying silent for so long. I regret teaching you that my love was endless and my boundaries were optional. Sarah tugged on Michael's sleeve. Let's go. As they turned away, Eleanor stepped back into her home, and shut the door behind her. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt free. She walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands were steady. Her heart was quiet. Eleanor stood at the window, watching the sun dip below the trees, her reflection visible in the glass. Older, wiser, and no longer afraid of being alone. She didn't know exactly what came next, but for once the unknown didn't scare her, because whatever it was, it would be hers. Eleanor says, I'm not here to make you happy. I'm here to live my life. I stepped forward into my own life, no longer apologizing for it. Eleanor stood in the center of her new apartment, small, sunlit, and quiet. The hardwood floors gleamed. A single vase of fresh lilies sat on the kitchen table. For the first time in decades, the space around her was entirely hers. No photos of someone else's family crowding the walls, no piles of paperwork about someone else's choices. Just peace. She ran her hand across the windowsill and looked out at the tree-lined street. Below, a bookstore, a cafe, a park. Life was still happening, and for once she was stepping into it, not watching from the sidelines. The money from the house sale had come through a week ago. With it, Eleanor had carefully planned a quiet escape. No grand declarations, just a move made with intention and clarity. She hadn't told Michael or Sarah, not out of spite, but out of necessity. They no longer got to dictate her narrative. Ruth arrived mid-morning with croissants and a bottle of sparkling water. Well? She asked, stepping inside. Do I finally get the grand tour? Eleanor smiled and opened her arms. You're looking at it. Ruth wandered through the apartment, humming in approval. It's perfect, light, clean, warm, just like you. They sat at the small table, eating in silence for a few minutes. How does it feel? Ruth asked. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. Like I finally exhaled. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You did the brave thing. Eleanor smiled softly. It didn't feel brave, it felt overdue. In the days following her move, Eleanor had allowed herself small luxuries she hadn't touched in years. Reading in bed with no interruptions, drinking tea without tending to someone else's needs, learning how to knit again, music in the mornings, long walks through the city. There was grief, of course, grief for the years lost, for the silence she'd swallowed, and for the version of herself that had once believed love required sacrifice. But there was also freedom. A letter from Michael had arrived 3 days after the house sale finalized, handwritten, brief. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't understand. I'm trying now." She'd read it twice, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. She wasn't ready to reply. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Sarah hadn't reached out. Eleanor suspected she never would. And that was fine. This part of her life wasn't about reparation. It was about reclamation. That afternoon, she wandered down to the park with a book tucked under her arm. Children played by the fountain. A young couple sat on a bench, their heads resting together. A man walked his dog and smiled at Eleanor as she passed. She sat beneath a tree and opened her book, sunlight spilling across the pages. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, ease. She wasn't a mother in that moment, or a widow, or a burden. She was simply a woman, alive, at peace. Later that evening, she called Ruth. "I was thinking," Eleanor said, "about taking a weekend trip. Just me." Ruth chuckled. "Where to?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but I want to stand in a place I've never been. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I don't have to be anything for anyone." "Then you should go," Ruth replied. "You've earned it." Eleanor smiled, looking around at her quiet home, at the choices she'd finally allowed herself to make. It had taken her 60-something years to say yes to herself. But she'd done it, and she wasn't done yet. Eleanor opens a letter from Michael. "I'm sorry, Mom. The apology wasn't for me. It was for him." Eleanor sat by the window, her hands gently resting on the letter Michael had sent. She'd read it several times over the past few days, and each time her reaction shifted. At first there had been a flare of hope. Hope that maybe he understood, that maybe this letter would undo the weight of everything that came before. But then came the realization. This letter wasn't a door opening, it was a mirror. Michael's words weren't about repairing their relationship, they were about relieving himself of guilt. She didn't blame him for that, but she also wasn't obligated to respond in the way he might have wanted. She brewed a cup of tea and sat down at her small kitchen table. A pad of stationery waited beside her. She picked up her pen. "Michael, we've both made mistakes, that's the truth. And we've both grown. That's the hope. We don't have to go backward to move forward. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not trying to fix what's broken either. I'm just trying to live. Take care of yourself." "Mom." She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and left it on the counter. She'd decide tomorrow whether or not to mail it. That afternoon, Eleanor walked down to the bookstore cafe near her apartment. The barista smiled warmly at her, already recognizing her as a regular. She ordered a cappuccino, sat by the window, and opened her notebook. She'd started journaling again, something she hadn't done since she was in her 20s. Each entry was like exhaling. She wrote about little things, the way the sunlight looked on her balcony in the morning, the way the city sounded at night, the peace in waking up without tension in her chest. But she also wrote about grief, about loneliness, about the ache of knowing she'd always loved Michael, even if their relationship never returned to what it once was. And that was the new truth she was learning. Love didn't require access, or even reconciliation. It could live quietly from a distance. The next day, Eleanor met Ruth at the art museum. "You look different," Ruth said as they walked through the sculpture garden. "Lighter." "I feel different," Eleanor replied. "Did something change?" "I think I finally let go of the idea that I needed closure to move on." They paused in front of a sculpture, a woman made of bronze, mid-step, her head tilted upward. "She reminds me of you," Ruth said. Eleanor smiled. "She reminds me of who I'm becoming." That evening, back in her apartment, Eleanor looked at the envelope still sitting on the counter. She picked it up, considered it one last time, and slid it into her purse. If she passed the mailbox on her walk tomorrow, she'd mail it. If not, she wouldn't. Either way, she'd said what she needed to say. 2 days later, her phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Can I visit sometime soon? Just to talk. No pressure." She stared at the message for a long while, then typed back. "I'm not sure yet. I'm still figuring out what's best for me." There was no malice in the reply, just honesty, and it felt good. That night, Eleanor lit a candle, poured herself a glass of wine, and opened a travel guide. Italy had always been a dream. Why not now? For the first time in her life, the future wasn't a looming question. It was an invitation. Eleanor agrees to meet Michael, but only on her own terms. This time I was in charge, and I chose my peace. Eleanor waited at the small corner cafe, her choice, her timing. She'd told Michael she'd meet him on a weekday mid-morning, not at the house, and not for long. The old her would have tried to make it convenient for him. Now, she was different. She stirred her tea slowly, eyes drifting to the window. A gentle breeze rolled through the open door, carrying in the scent of fresh pastries and wet pavement. The city felt alive, like she was finally seeing it for the first time. Michael arrived, slightly breathless. He looked older, more tired than she remembered. "Hi, Mom," he said, slipping into the chair across from her. "Hi, Michael." There was a long pause before either of them spoke. Eleanor took a sip of her tea. Michael looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "For everything. For trying to control things. For making decisions for you instead of with you." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I didn't realize how much I was asking of you," he added. "I just thought it was the right thing. For you." Eleanor said quietly, "It was the right thing for you, but it wasn't right for me." Michael looked like he'd expected that, and also like it still hurt. "I was scared," he admitted. "I thought you'd end up alone, or that you'd fall, or forget something important, and maybe I just didn't want to carry the responsibility." "That's fair," Eleanor said. "But that doesn't mean you had the right to take control of my life." Michael leaned back, silent for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I wrote this," he said, "before I got your message. It was supposed to be everything I couldn't say to your face." Eleanor took it but didn't open it. "I've said what I needed to say, Michael. I don't need closure, but I'll read it. I'm not here to fix things," he added. I miss you. I miss you in our lives." Eleanor exhaled slowly. "We're not going back to how things were. That's not possible. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to." Michael blinked, stung, but didn't interrupt. "But," she continued, "I'm open to something new, something honest, something respectful." "I'd like that," he said, his voice quiet. The waiter came by with their drinks. Michael ordered coffee. Eleanor smiled, sipping hers again, grounded in her calm. "I'm not the same person anymore," she said. "I don't live for other people's comfort. I don't need to be needed. I just want peace." "You seem different," he said. "More you." She nodded. "Exactly." They talked a little more, about mundane things, weather, books, her recent interest in pottery classes. She told him about her plans to travel. He told her Sarah had been thinking about reaching out, but didn't know how. "Tell her there's no rush," Eleanor said. "I'm not holding on to bitterness. But I'm also not waiting around for apologies." Michael nodded again, seeming to absorb each word without resistance. As they stood to leave, he offered to walk her home. "No," Eleanor said gently. "I'm walking a different way today." He smiled faintly, accepting the message behind the words. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear. Eleanor turned left while Michael went right. She paused on the sidewalk, feeling the breeze sweep past her face. She didn't feel empty. She didn't feel sad. She felt clear. Eleanor steps outside and watches the sunset, thinking about the new chapter ahead. "I didn't need their approval anymore. I only needed my own." Eleanor sat by the window in her sunlit apartment, cradling a cup of coffee. The light danced across the hardwood floor, and outside, the world hummed softly. She breathed in deeply, not out of habit, but intention. This was for years, Eleanor had shaped her identity around being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's caretaker. Now, she was simply Eleanor. And that was enough. The apartment was smaller than her old house, but it didn't feel like less. It felt like space she had chosen. Her art hung on the walls, her books filled the shelves, Her kitchen was stocked with things she actually used, not what she was told she might need someday. She glanced over at her suitcase, half-packed. Tomorrow, she was going on her first solo trip to the coast. She'd rented a small cottage near the water for 2 weeks. Just her, the sea, and silence. No one to check in with. No expectations. Just freedom. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Ruth, holding a bakery box and wearing her signature red scarf. "Donuts," Ruth announced, "because you're becoming someone fabulous." Eleanor laughed, letting her in. "I think I already am." They sat together, powdered sugar dusting the table between them. "You look good," Ruth said. "Different, peaceful." "I feel that way," Eleanor replied. "It's strange though. Letting go, it's not just about walking away from them. It's about releasing the version of me who thought their love had to be earned." Ruth nodded. "That's the hard part." Eleanor sipped her coffee. "I don't hate them. Not even Mike, but I've accepted that I'm not responsible for their comfort anymore." "You were never supposed to be," Ruth said. "You just forgot that." Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat on the balcony, writing in a journal she'd recently picked up. She didn't write about Michael or Sarah. She wrote about how the ocean sounded in her dreams, about the joy she found in learning to paint, about the moment she realized silence wasn't emptiness, but space for breath. Her phone buzzed, a message from Michael. "Michael, just wanted to say thank you for meeting me, for listening." She didn't feel the usual ache, just a soft, warm acceptance. She typed back, "Eleanor, I appreciate that. Wishing you and Sarah well." It was the first message in months that didn't feel like a plea for something more. That evening, Ruth came by again, this time with a travel journal and a guidebook. "Promise me you'll go somewhere you've never been," Ruth said. Eleanor grinned. "That's the whole point." As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with gold and lavender, Eleanor stood on the balcony and closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't planning for anyone else. There was no dinner to cook, no phone call to return, no favor to offer. There was only her breath, her heartbeat, her future. And that was more than enough. Later that night, Michael called again. His voice was different this time. No demands, no guilt, just truth. "I get it now," he said. "You needed to live your own life, and I need to learn to live mine. But I hope someday you'll still be part of it." Eleanor paused, hand resting gently on the phone. "I'll always be here," she replied, "but not in the way you think." Eleanor laughed softly. "I'll always be here, but not in the way you think." Sometimes the best gift we can give is the space to grow. Eleanor sat on the bench at the edge of the botanical garden, her fingers gently brushing the petals of a blooming camellia. The air was warm with the scent of lavender and soil. She had come here often over the past few months, drawn to its quiet and its patience. This place, she realized, mirrored her own life now, still growing, still blooming, but at her own pace. Michael had called again the previous night, not with questions or guilt, but just to talk. His voice had lost its edge. He didn't ask her to come back into his life. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply said, "I hope you're doing well," and she had answered honestly, "I am." It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was something far more valuable. Respect. She stood, brushing the dirt from her jeans, and made her way to the small cafe near the exit. Ruth was already there, sipping tea with her usual knowing smile. "Did you decide?" Ruth asked, as Eleanor joined her. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, I'm meeting him this afternoon, just one last time." Ruth's brow rose slightly. "Are you sure?" "I'm not doing it for him," Eleanor said. "I'm doing it for me. I want to say goodbye the right way." Later that day, Eleanor sat at a quiet park bench, near her old neighborhood, the same one where she used to push Michael on the swings when he was little. He arrived on time, looking unsure of himself. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Mike." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the children nearby. "You look different," he said. "I feel different." He hesitated, then said, "I didn't realize how much I leaned on you, expected you to just be there." Without question, Eleanor met his eyes. "You weren't alone in that. I let it happen. I believed that being useful was the only way to be loved." I didn't mean to make you feel like a burden. I know. He looked down. Sarah and we've been going to therapy, trying to fix things. I think it's working. I hope it is. He glanced at her. Do you think we'll be close again? She thought about that. Close, she said slowly. Maybe, one day, but not the same as before. I'm not that version of myself anymore. I understand. They sat quietly again. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was still. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo, one of them together from years ago. She handed it to him. I'm not erasing our past, she said, but I'm also not living in it. Michael's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. Thank you, he whispered. She stood. Goodbye, Michael. Goodbye, Mom. She walked away not because she had to, but because she chose to. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was necessary. Later that evening, Eleanor sat on her balcony, watching the sky shift from peach to indigo. Ruth had sent her a message. How did it go? She replied. Exactly how it needed to. Eleanor took a deep breath, picked up the book she'd been meaning to start, and settled into her chair. Her phone buzzed again, but this time she let it ring. Whoever it was could wait, because this moment belonged to her. She wasn't waiting for approval. She wasn't holding her breath. She wasn't wondering what would happen next. She was living it. The future no longer frightened her. It invited her. She had said the final goodbye not to Michael, not to her past, but to the version of herself who always came second. Now she came first, and she would never go back. Eleanor looks at the horizon with a sense of peace, and says, "This was my time."